and how you came up with creating the Harlem Blues and Jazz Band.
Just luck. Um, we had bought a big house on the Sound, a big Tudor house, and I had started to get to know some of the musicians, and they would come up to the house, and ultimately we had a party, and we had several. And at this party, I said to Clyde Bernhardt, who had been trombonist and blues singer with King Oliver in the 30s, I said to him, we should form a band. And he said, okay, if you'll take care of the business part, I'll do some of the music part. And so we started right there. 73, I was still having a full-time orthodontic practice. But what was good about it was that I could run my own schedule. So I could go with the band often when we started going to Europe already in 76. So, and we're still together. The band is still going. This past year, in October, we went to Macau. So, and we were supposed to go to Japan, but we got shut down because of the swine flu. So we're going to probably go to Japan this year.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's still ongoing.
So, so who was in the first incarnation of?
First incarnation was Clyde Bernhardt on trombone, Frank Williams, who had played with Duke Ellington in the 40s. He was on trumpet and flugelhorn. Then I'm interested in saxophones. We had a fellow by the name of George James, who is sort of almost like, not like Eddie Durham, but he's also underrated, and I happened to get hold of him, and he played alto in the band. And then we had actually Cozy Cole's youngest brother, Reuben J. Cole, was on the piano. So most of the musicians lived in Newark, so it was sort of a nucleus of Newark musicians, because we had a vocalist by the name of Miss Rhapsody. Her name was Viola Wells, actually, or Viola Evans. And then on drums, we had a drummer by the name of Tommy Benford, who had drummed with Jelly Roll Morton. And of course, these were the people I was interested in. If somebody had played with Jelly or with King Oliver or something, I tried to get to know them. Yeah, so I was a jazz fan from way back. So
then tell me about, you said that you had wanted to get Eddie Durham into
well,
the band.
actually, what happened, I was a regular patron at the West End. And Phil introduced me to a lot of musicians by just having them on the stage. And I wanted, when I heard Eddie play, this is my definition of Eddie Durham. He's never played a note that was not jazz. He can't play a note that isn't jazz. And so, and of course I knew how significant he was, and I was hoping to get him in the band. And luckily, Clyde decided to go elsewhere, and I was able to get Eddie to come in the band.
Stop.
So when you approached Eddie about joining the band, how did that go?
I'm not sure that I remember. He got into the band. I think it was because I had some jobs. Yeah, and so he sort of worked his way into the band in a way. But I mean, once I knew that I wanted him, there was no question of that. And he was just like you've heard, way above everybody. I mean, this band has existed for 37 years, and I would say two American musical geniuses have gone through the band. One of them is Eddie Durham. The other is Roger Ram Ramirez, who wrote Lover Man. He was in the band and made 2 European tours with us. So, the rest have been high-level musicians, but not quite of that breadth and depth. And Eddie probably more so than Ram. Yeah.
So when you said that you have been a jazz music fan from way back, when did you first become aware of Eddie Durham?
Probably when I was living in Sweden during the Second World War. probably around 1944, 45, because of Lunsford. And Eddie told me a very interesting thing about Lunsford. He said, Lunsford's band, we use choreography. He said, he was in the trombone section. And he said, we picked up our trombones in unison, we breathed in unison and played. And he wrote many of the arrangements.
So did he write any arrangements for the Harlem?
Actually, I asked him once, and he said, and I think basically by the time he got to me, he was more or less finished. He wanted just to coast, because frequently he was asked to join Count Basie reunion bands, and he turned them down. Partly because I don't think he wanted to tour with a big band. Maybe his eyesight was going, so he didn't want to read anymore. I mean, he could read upside down, but I think, and because I know he stayed. I've heard this from others. The reason why I stay with the Harlem Blues and Jazz Band, he said, partly is because we do head arrangements, and he said I like Doc, so I got a very nice. Couldn't have had a better compliment from anybody.
That's terrific. So were you friends with?
Yeah.
Outside of being.
Yeah. We were. Well, I've been friends with. See, I'm not an agent, and I'm not trying to exploit anybody, and so they know me as a fan, and they know also that I'm reliable. They'll always get their money, and so it's been a friendship, which perhaps would have been better if it hadn't been. I might have been more successful, but I'm not very aggressive. And the band might have had more jobs, might have been better known, but because I've had some very, I'm amazed myself that I've been able to attract such great musicians, and they've stayed for so long. So
it is. It's quite an achievement, and deserves much more time than.
Well, I mean, nobody could have made a living out of what I did, but it supplemented, and I think psychologically, because I was their biggest booster. So that I think this: if you've been used to being before the public, you miss it when you're no longer before the public. And I kept them before the public. We made tours to Europe, which not everybody was doing. I had European connections. And now lately, in the last few years, we've been going to Russia. And the band has a greater following in Vladivostok than we do in Harlem, despite the fact that I've touted the name the Harlem Blues and Jazz Band for 37 years, which is unfortunate. We've played in Harlem, but not very often.
Interesting. So during the time that Eddie Durham was with you, where all did you play? Okay.
Perhaps the most significant was that in 1980, we were the first American band to go behind the Iron Curtain and play in Dresden. So we went through the towers with the machine guns and stuff, and they took your passport and kept it for about a half hour, and they really looked at you. I remember Bobby Williams, our trumpeter, was wearing a hat. They made him take the hat off, and they compared it. But when they found out that we were musicians, musiker, it softened things. But still, we were the first American band into behind the Iron Curtain in 1980. Ram Ramirez was in the band as well as Eddie, at that time.
So you brought two musical geniuses behind the Iron Curtain. And what kind of music did the band play?
Swing, basically. Yeah. I made suggestions, for instance, mostly when we did recordings. I would say, can we have a break here, or could this instrument follow that instrument, stuff. But otherwise, I stayed out of it. They played. I wasn't going to tell them how to play.
So what makes you give Eddie Durham the classification of musical genius?
My experiences with him, and.
Can we get you to make that as a statement, Eddie?
Why I think Eddie Durham deserves to be on such a pedestal is because he was, first of all, an exceptional human being. And secondly, he was a master musician. So there's no way I couldn't be in awe of him. No way. And I think the musicians sensed this. That's why they stayed.
And he sounds like the kind of person that doesn't, that everybody should be in awe of, but that was so down to earth and approachable and genuinely nice.
Well, you know, when I first came to this country from Sweden in 1947, I wanted to meet some of the musicians and get to know them, and often I was very shy, and I often thought, well, who am I to go up to these guys and ask them about this, that, and the other thing, and to get to know them. But it was the other way around, because they were not honored in their own country. So here comes somebody who knows their background, knows what recordings they've made, and so it was much easier than I thought, because I had other biases before I even started talking to them. And eventually, I mean, the first black real authentic jazz musician that I got to know was a bass player by the name of Hayes Alvis. And he was living alone in Harlem. His wife had left him. And I got to know him very well. And ultimately, he introduced me to a lot of musicians and asked me to be the executor of his will. So that was my first experience of, you know, I've straddled the black-white dichotomy.
Well, now tell me, you said what's your favorite story about Eddie Durham?
There are many.
Okay, give me your top three favorites.
Well, I'll tell you one that happened. I had a British friend, Peter Carr, and he and I shared some of the European tour responsibilities because he was working for Birmingham International Airport and could fly any airline gratis. And when, for instance, the band had residencies sometimes for 3 weeks in Switzerland at a particular, it was called the Limerick restaurant. And so I didn't get involved with that. I could still stay home and take care of my patients. And Peter Carr could fly in, meet them, be sure they got to their hotel, and then fly home again, and then come back 3 weeks later and pay them. So we had this, and this happened on Peter's watch. That this was long before the euro. So with going to all these different countries, you collect all these different coins. So Eddie Durham has a pocket full of coins. He puts them out on the table, and he says, "Peter, what do I have here?" And Peter, very painstakingly, Dutch coins over here, German coins here, Belgian this and that, Swiss. And when he's done them and he has them all in these 5 or 6 neat piles, Eddie Durham looks at it and says, "Oh, thank you." And he scoops them all up and puts them back in his pocket. Another thing was that Eddie was always on the phone. At the airports, we always had to make sure that he got on the plane with us. He was always making calls. And once he was going over for some other reason, for not with the band, and I was involved somehow with him. And I remember all of a sudden, a car pulls up in front of me on my driveway, and Eddie Durham steps out, and he's missed the plane. So, and I called Peter Carr in England, and I said, "He's coming, I'll get him on the next plane, but don't meet the first one." So then I took him out to the airport, and I said, he missed the plane. I said he didn't know what was going on. And I still remember the guy that I had to talk to looked in his passport and said, "Well, he seems to be a very traveled gentleman, you know." And so I tried to make it that he was too confused to, but anyway, they put him on the plane. They had the room. They put him on the plane. Peter met him, and he did what he had to do. Well, I told you that story on the phone about driving him home once to Brooklyn, and he gets out of the car, and it was, it was a little bit run down area of Brooklyn, tenement buildings, and all these little black children come running up, Mr. Durham, Mr. Durham, Mr. Durham, and in my naivete, I thought, oh, the kids know at least who he is. Nobody else does. But Eddie Durham burst my bubble by turning to me and he said, I give them pennies. Yeah, no, but Eddie was incredible. In other words, this can't be taken literally, but it kind of sums it up by saying that when we were on tour, Eddie could tell me what was going to happen next week. He was that prescient and knowledgeable. And I also remember once when we went into a theater, we were ahead of the playing time. We had just arrived in the town, and he went through the stage and he would go like this and he'd clap, and he said, the old-time drummers used to do that, and they used to get the feel of the acoustics in the theater, and then they would tune their drums. So he could tell you things that you couldn't find out from anybody else.
Well, fantastic. So can you, apparently. Is there anything else that you can think of that?
Well, his manner of speaking was always a mild mannered speaking, and often he would come say things like, "I say this in order to say this," and he would develop some kind of theme. Yeah, I still have one other thing. The band went ahead of me once to Germany, and I knew from some of the musicians that were in there that they would probably be playing, standard tunes and all of that, and they would not be dipping into the blues. And when I got to the place where everybody was staying, I said to myself, I'm going to room with Eddie tonight, so I'll find out what's going on with the band. It was in the afternoon, and Eddie was sitting on the bed, and he looked up as I was coming in through the door. He said, Doc, you got to get hold of this band. We're not playing enough blues. So he knew. He knew everything. So being with him was like an experience of its own, and he was such a sweet man, lovely. So that's